Hello, I'm the Angry Spork. Batman and Superman are the most popular, well-known characters in comics and pop culture in general. So what happens when the infinite possibilities of Elseworlds crosses them over into one being? Well, aside from probably the first fanfiction concept every kid has ever had. I'm taking issue with Superman speeding bullets, so let's see if this one-shot makes us want to turn the page, or turn our heads. The cover has the main character high above the city, likely flying, kinda doing the Dark Knight Returns pose, but without the lightning. It looks cool, though also subdued with how it's set against a dark gradient, like an elaborately framed picture. Ironically, he's using his flight in supervision to find a decent place to park the Batmobile. Written by J.M. DeMatteis, with art by Eduardo Barreto, we begin in space! As a rocket escapes the doomed planet Krypton, apparently already glowing green, with some narration pondering how differently things could have gone. In my mind's eye, I see it all. The planet explodes, the rocket is fired, like some silver bullet across space, and killing a giant space werewolf. Narration goes on how even a change in wind current could have changed the craft's trajectory once it reached Earth, sent it somewhere else on the planet, to a peasant, priest, chieftain, or dictator, and the world would have been denied its greatest hero. Pepsi Man! This time the baby is found by Thomas and Martha Wayne, the latter of whom quickly calls dibs on the baby inside the mystery rocket. Alfred Pennyworth approaches, suggesting he turn off the car since they probably won't be going to a political function as planned, and gas is apparently expensive. Alfred, you never cease to amaze me. You knew our anniversary was coming up, so you arranged for an alien vessel to crash in front of us to surprise us with a child to adopt, you sly dog. Yeah, I'm not sure what the good doctor is referring to. That their butler is accurately guessing that they're skipping the governor's dinner to tend to the kid? They're rich, so I doubt he's commending him for what I assume to be a joke about gas prices. Whatever. In the style of a photo album, we see the baby, naturally named Bruce, grow up, narration explaining that the couple gave up their social lives of charity balls and parties. Martha took to the kid like she'd given birth to him, assuring he respected people of all types, while Thomas apparently wrote journals theorizing about the event, but also educating the boy academically. The kid was quick and never got injured, but the doc wanted to expand his mental capabilities, teaching his son that the cowards and bullies use violence, but you, of all who live, must aspire to be something greater, something higher. Yeah, but what if the guy using violence isn't a bully or a coward, just someone that really, really likes justice? Justice and bats. The kid's sheltered existence did lend itself to loneliness, but that's when Alfred would be around for him to talk to. They gave him everything, and in return, young Bruce had a quality that brought out the best in them. They gave up all their vices, smoking, drinking, gambling, crank-calling leaders of industry in other countries, and smearing caviar on the windshields of their neighbors' cars. Rich people prank differently than you and me. One fateful night, the family has finished seeing an old Zorro movie and leaves the Monarch Theater.
Yeah, all right. Which one of you sold the Monarch out?
Bruce aspires to be just like the hero, a righter of wrongs, though previous movie nights had him wanting to be like Sherlock Holmes or John Carter. So I guess they didn't see that Disney movie. Thomas is more inclined to approve of the more cerebral Holmes as a role model. You can't right wrongs with a fist or a sword, Bruce. It just doesn't work that way. Do machetes count as swords? A mugger approaches them when they enter an alley, ordering them to stay quiet and going for Martha's necklace. Thomas resists, so the criminal feels forced to shoot them both. Narration notes how, later on, Bruce would mention that the once-monthly outings to the city were always special to him, a fancy dinner, his choice of movies, but that night would be considered more special. The mugger missed his shots, and Thomas beat the ever-living snot out of him. His parents told him they decided to enroll him in Gotham Academy for the fall, feeling that he had to go face the world. They couldn't protect him from it any longer. With his parents dead, Bruce starts crying, and since the mugger hates it when kids cry, fires on him too. But the bullets only damage his clothes, as the lad points accusingly at the murderer, his eyes glowing red, and declaring how much he hates him back, as a beam of heat energy is unleashed. Joe Chill shambles away, burned up, head on fire, as Bruce struggles to control the power within, begging his parents to make it stop. The gunman would be found the next morning, dead and nearly unrecognizable from his injuries. Bruce was so traumatized he didn't acknowledge arriving police, only muttering, "the bullets," over and over again. And we observe the Waynes being laid to rest in the rain, because all funerals happen in the rain, and eventually Alfred and Bruce are the only ones at the graves. I wonder what power would have manifested if one of the Wayne Enterprise board members came by and told him the company would be waiting for him when he came of age. Freeze breath, maybe? Intellectually, he knew there was nothing a 9-year-old could have done, but as the years pass, he remembered the bullets, like silver rockets, like shooting stars, in a parallel imagery to the first page. He maintained a sense of guilt, shame, as time passed, and we jumped to him at 21. Alfred insists he shouldn't be lurking around the house like a ghost, eating breakfast at 9 at night, rather going out and experiencing the world. Bruce appreciates his butler's tenacity, this being a subject he brings up all the time, saying that he's every bit the parent the Waynes would have wanted, but the recluse has a dark take on the world. Pointing to the night's newspaper, he says that the world Pennyworth wants him to be part of is filled with violence and madness, blood and death, and frankly, he hates it all. "Sir, I warned you not to read those Ziggy comic strips once they let Zack Snyder write them." Narration mentions that Bruce simultaneously loathed and needed that aforementioned insanity, as he unlocks a door and enters a room where he's clipped tragic stories from the paper and pasted them onto the wall, for reasons he couldn't say then, nor in the present. In a way, obsessing over others' pain distracted him from his own, but tonight it's not working. All the sounds of Gotham ring in his head. Gunshots, calls for help, broken bones, an irresistible wave of human suffering. So it's either his super hearing or several of his neighbors are watching OAN. He hears footsteps and unfamiliar voices in his home, finding 2 masked gunmen, one of whom with an automatic rifle to Alfred's head. He's more angry at their threats than intimidated, smacking one out the window, who I think had the gun on him, and taking fire from the other. Remembering Chill's smiling face, he crushes the weapon in the intruder's hand. And wow, this is some inconsistent coloring. The panels show a much lighter skin tone than the openings in the mask. Weird. Anyway, he's about to flash fry the guy like he did his parents' killer, but instead focuses his heat vision into the fireplace. A more intense blast destroys the wall as he recalls the moment 12 years prior, remembering it more clearly, realizing he could have saved his parents. And maybe I could have saved 15% on my car insurance. I have to call that Geico agent back, quickly! With his boss questioning his origins, Alfred takes him to a cave beneath the mansion, where the alien rocket was kept, along with Thomas's extensive journals. April 1st, my little 5-year-old Bruce asked me where babies come from. I'm a doctor, but I wasn't really ready to get into the details, so I told him rockets from space, so I technically wasn't lying. Feeling he's found himself, Bruce flies higher within the cave, flying amongst his brothers the bats, thinking he hid his abilities as punishment for that little boy's crimes. This Bruce Wayne takes Ding Dong Ditch a lot more seriously. In an unknown location, a man in a purple suit, hidden by an office chair, is berating the 2 crooks that simply limped away from their job of breaking into Wayne Manor. They were paid in advance to make some noise and scare the rabbit deeper into his hole.
Of course you realize this means war.
The goons try explaining why they failed. Little mistake here of their boss's dialogue bubble joined to one of theirs, but quicker than they can see, while looking directly at him, the mystery man picks each one up by his neck and throttles both to death. "What's the matter, boys? All choked up?" All we see of his face is a pair of eyes and lips laughing against the shadows. Oh no, the Rolling Stones logo has come alive and turned to supervillainy!
It's just like Carol said the old gypsy woman said!
2 months go by, and the police are in a standoff with a man on a rooftop with a rifle. Narration explains that 45-year-old divorcee Mick Johnson was deeply depressed and had repressed anger from being abused as a child, letting it fester. But anger needs an expression. And sometimes interpretive dance just doesn't cut it. Anger needs an expression. The angry spork agrees with this statement. For some reason, anger needs an expression. You don't say! You don't say! You don't say! Oh, this is new, but I'm not complaining. Look, this universe's Dark Knight can homage the symbol without a custom jet. Before this desperate man that had hospitalized 6 people could be offered a hand of compassion, he's met with a heavily shadowed Batman on a splash page. Though shading obscures much of the detail, it does show what seem to be a lot of folds in the material, which is pretty nicely detailed. When shooting him doesn't work, assuming it's a cop in a flak jacket, the disturbed man decides to use a grenade, even if it kills them both. In an interesting choice, Bats doesn't say a word, merely signaling the man to throw it over. He's obliged, taking the explosive in his hands and suppressing the detonation completely unfazed, staring at the man in an undeniably cool moment. Not long after, the gunman is seen by onlookers falling from the roof, later saying he was thrown as effortlessly as a piece of paper, and just as he was realizing how much he wanted to live, Batman swooped in, caught him, left him with the police, and flew away, with people not entirely sure what they just saw. The next day, the news reported on the incident, knowing how big the story was, but their information was so slim that all they could do was speculate, exaggerate, and distort, even more so than usual. Bad dum-dums! Bad! Lex Luthor, who was earlier noted to have returned after a year of seclusion following an industrial accident, he slipped while changing the number on the "Days Since Last Accident" sign, is in a meeting with the board of Wayne Enterprises, ready to sign papers to buy them out, turning control over to him and add to the reclusive heir's wealth to do as he pleases. But someone objects, denying Lex the kind of control in Gotham he enjoys in Metropolis. "Who the devil are you?" "This, sir, is Mr. Bruce Wayne." If you don't believe them, just ask the saucy secretary he just charmed by showing her how to putt with an indoor golf game. Until now, Bruce had stayed out of his business, but he's changed and decided to be more active, like stopping this buyout he never permitted and firing the firm that arranged it. Luthor is incensed, grabbing Wayne's coat and threatening he won't let a gutless recluse upend his plans. Bruce removes his hand, saying how he read, with compassion, about the chemical factory explosion that nearly killed Lex and left him out of the public eye until recently, saying he respects his courage and hopes that respect can be reciprocated. The narrator, however, notes having studied Luthor, his zero respect for the law and fixation on gaining power by any means necessary, his dark deeds masked by charity work and photo ops with politicians. This is what I call my painfully relevant similarities to present-day sigh. Ugh. And to further indicate this was published in the early 90s, that thing in the woman's hand is a cell phone, not the box it came in. Wayne has brought in Perry White to head the Gotham Gazette, to mold others he had brought in from around the country, the best and brightest, lead them in creating a paper that will make a difference for the city. That's when Lois Lane appears, and Bruce begins losing composure, as well as the color in his lower lip, bumping into a desk, spilling coffee, and excuses himself awkwardly in very Clark Kentian fashion. "And that's how I met my new boss." That's right, this whole time the narration has come from Lois. You wouldn't have thought as much given the lack of typos. But how hilarious would that be if captions had the misspelled words scribbled out next to the correct ones? She was charmed by his klutzy demeanor, but as weeks went by, Lois saw more of the idealistic determination that made her accept that offer to work at the Gazette. That and the Daily Planet had been bought by Luthor, and Perry subsequently fired. As she's walking the streets on a snowy evening, Lex stops his limo to offer her a ride. She accepts, but hasn't forgotten how she tracked garbage to his door back in Metropolis, only for him to get away unscathed. Observed from above by Batman as they drive, some old history is dragged up, like how Lois wrote a story about Lex killing his own parents, tarnishing his name. It's also mentioned he lost the libel suit, and that was the alleged reason why he bought the planet in the first place. He claims to have become a changed man since his near-fatal accident, is still attracted to Lois, claims fate is pulling them together, and offers her a job as he reaches for her knee. So she promptly smacks him with a warning to never touch her. To no one's surprise, it doesn't matter how famous you are. They don't just let you do it. Lex says he'll have her and Gotham just the same, then stops the limo to push her out about 50 blocks from her apartment, before driving off laughing. As she's dusting herself off and about to find a phone to call a cab, she's still adjusting to the city after all, she finds she was left in a less than ideal part of town, as several men approach her with ill intent. Lois isn't helpless. She can defend herself, but is as clumsy as Bruce, tripping on a trash can as she backs away. Equal parts scared and embarrassed. Scarebarrassed? She prepares for the worst when the earthquake hit. At first it looked like Batman dropping down with such force, never touching the ground, but creating a shockwave that broke the concrete. But given the motion lines, I guess he flew up from underground? Anyway, Lois watches him make short work of the punks, knocking them around and even heat visioning one's face. Previously fascinated by him, and thinking Gotham had finally found a protector against the criminal element, her opinion has changed. I understood that this man, if he was a man, was no hero. He was a dangerous, psychopathic animal.
I don't understand the difference.
I know you don't. Get him out of here!
He tells the creeps he could kill them, but they aren't worth it, as he offers to help Lois to her feet. She smacks away his hand, noticing his demeanor had changed, as if he wanted to explain himself, but instead flew off in silence as an officer arrived on the scene. Weird how the falling snow only seems to appear in the shadows of these two in these panels, and nowhere else. Kinda makes it look like they've been imbued with the powers of Captain Universe, but that's Marvel, and not the kind of crossover we're looking at today. She goes to the Gazette to write up an article on the matter, and finds Bruce there as well, claiming to do his best work at night. He's started burning shapes into the faces of criminals now. That guy from the other page got a Shetland pony. She explains her encounter, and Bruce is confused why she's so disgusted by the guy that saved her. She says his disregard for human life was appalling, adding to the world's pain, when he could do more to better the world, like what Bruce is doing with his wealth. And then they begin making out. Weeks passed, and we were still making out at my desk. In that time, the Gazette gathered evidence of illegal operations pointing to Luthor, drug deals, arms shipments, but nothing concrete, with Batman no more successful with his own efforts. A man in a trench coat barges into Bruce's office one day while the publisher is debating with Perry.
I'm telling you, Bruce, you run that story and Luthor'll sue the pants off you.
I've got a closet full of pants, Perry. He's not being flippant. He's been so isolated he takes that phrase very seriously and thinks he can just bring a pair of slacks to court and settle any dispute. Sometimes it works. The pants he buys are so expensive, some plaintiffs do accept them as compensation. The intruder turns out to be Lex, threatening Wayne and deciding to show Lois what he meant earlier about being a new man, by ripping off his face Mission Impossible style and declaring that his old self died in that explosion last year, only to be reborn as the Joker. Wait. Then whose voice should I be reading his dialogue with in my head? Clancy Brown or Mark Hamill?
Someone tell me, this is important!
He proceeds to shoot Bruce with an umbrella gun. You know, the classic Joker trademark of weaponized umbrellas, which knocks him through the window. Was it that powerful a gun, or was Bruce just being dramatic? The villain then scoops up Lois, claiming she was only hanging out with the rich boy to inspire jealousy, and then jumps out the window with her. Fortunately, he has a propeller in his coat that lets him fly because comics. Also because comics, he's able to exposit what truly happened after that accident without heavy winds drowning out his voice. He was heavily scarred, much worse than press releases informed, and doctors did what they could, resulting in his present appearance. Gee, reminded you of anything? He sank into a depression, losing interest in the money and power he had long worked for, and began overeating and watching endless amounts of television. Believe me, there's only so much Wheel of Fortune a man can take. Seriously, what moron asks if there's a Z when the clue is U.S. Capital City? Did she think the answer was Zolumbus, Ohio? Lex began seeing this alteration as a new beginning, and now his days of hiding his true self behind the veneer of respectability are over. Look, there's no need to be obtuse. If you're going to enter the world of politics, just say so. Landing on a skyscraper, he says Gotham is just the town for him to reveal his darkness for all to see, as opposed to the clean and decent metropolis, and wants Lois at his side, though she of course rebuffs him. That's when Batman appears, finally meeting the, clown king of industry? Who then states that the hero has interrupted his flow of money and weapons, but nothing permanent. Bats lifts him up, leaving Lane behind, rips off the propeller, and says he isn't done yet. Sadly, he's not the only one, As it turns out, Joker hired an army of mercenaries armed with weapons of war that chose now, for whatever reason, to launch an attack on the city and its police. The intent is for the pudgy clown to take over Gotham and declare it the independent nation of Jokerania. Oh, come on. Luthorwania sounds so much better, and it was right there! Hearing all the suffering throughout the city, Batman threatens to kill the villain and rip the corpse apart, which Joker takes as a sign the Cape is as far gone as he is. Am I correct in my assumption? Yes! And Batman throws him to the city below. He's hoping to land on a taxi. It'll be worth it for the catch-a-cab joke alone. Lois, however, seems to disagree, with her mere utterance of no surprisingly inspiring Bats to grab the Joker before he can go splat, take him to jail, and proceed to stop the mercenaries with his array of powers, but being strictly non-lethal and far less barbarous. I've watched news footage of that night many times. It amazes me, like watching a cocoon opening, or a baby being born. What childbirths have you been attending, lady? Lane narrates that Batman was still that child who watched his parents die, but put on a costume and, in a narrow vision clouded by guilt and anger, dispensed punishment, but in doing so suppressed his own soul. Also, there's something absolutely delightful about seeing Batman punt a bomb upwards back into an attack blimp he just snagged the bad guys from. He returns to Lois, still chilling on that rooftop, and says Batman behaved differently, foregoing the brutality and vindictiveness he'd previously operated by. He could be a symbol of hope, rising above the level of the evil he's trying to stop instead of being reduced to it. He doesn't think he has it in him, but she pulls his mask down and says Bruce Wayne does. She narrates that it doesn't really matter when she realized his secret, but it was more important that he finally believed in himself, the decent idealist she'd fallen in love with. They kiss, and he flies her into the sky, as she returns to her speculation from the beginning, how small changes could have landed that rocket somewhere else, now mentioning a Kansas farmer because tongue-in-cheek reference. The story ends with Lois concluding that only one series of events could have given the world its greatest hero, and Bruce flies high in the daytime sky as Superman. His first day with a new name isn't going great. The sun just exploded. That was Superman speeding bullets. Both a good story and also kind of a thinker. Part of the reason Bats operates the way he does is because he's human. He knows from personal experience and study what the human body can handle, so while he might severely injure an enemy, he generally knows when to stop. This version of Kal-El never scraped his knee or broke his arm, so he didn't get the experiential knowledge of what that's like, even if his studies from his dad might have mentioned something intellectually. Martha taught him to be respectful of others, but all we get is that was more based on their nationalities and ideologies. He was otherwise sheltered from the world, so much so it was nearly a decade before his parents decided to let him go to school with other kids. Unlike his main canon counterpart, this Bruce wasn't a frail child with no chance of stopping a mugger. He could have all along, but didn't, and resented himself for it. Really, this story could be seen as a good reason why, cool a concept as it may be, Batman should not have Superman's powers, nor should Supes have more bat-like traits. The idea that Bruce is still some child crying out for his parents is one I don't entirely agree with. This version, sure, because he didn't seem to focus himself in study or training, but the Bruce we know used his tragedy to prevent others, tempered by his years abroad, giving an outlet for his pain, but not necessarily being the only reason for it. He's not quite as selfish, for lack of a better term. This Bruce let confirmation bias and cynicism cloud his judgment, more focused on hurting the bad people that deserved it at the cost of his humanity. Granted, he only had one fatality, Joe Chill, but that was entirely accidental. He could have killed any number of other crooks, and didn't, but that seemed more about contempt that they weren't worth it, rather than his own humanity, or feeling they could change for the better if they tried. It wasn't because the Waynes were bad parents, only that their inevitable fate didn't give them time to iron a few things out. Otherwise, maybe he would have ended up a superhero like Clark did, just with more money. Because being a moral paragon / space demigod women swoon over doesn't make him enviable enough. So, yeah, human limitations being all the better for Batman. As to how the story is told, the narration and dialogue are great, often helping to assert events or character traits without being too detailed, mostly giving as much as you need. It kind of flips the Bruce Wayne's the mask, Batman is the real face shtick to be more about Superman being not the powers, but the man using them.
Lois, Superman is what I can do. Clark is who I am.
Though some things are kind of glossed over. Bruce doesn't seem to do anything for 12 years, too resentful and distrusting of the world, which, yeah, I can relate. And I guess he spent 2 months before his pointy-eared debut harnessing his powers, or so it could be assumed. There was talk about how Luthor had ruined Metropolis, but no actual details. Considering it was later stated to be too clean, it really comes off as confusing. It's unsurprising that they combined Joker and Luthor into one, which they kind of telegraphed with Lex wearing purple gloves, and maybe that's why his gal Friday was in a light-colored dress, and the emphasized laughter when he kicks Lois out of his limo. It's not meant to be a surprise, so feels fitting that the reveal is in the last panel on a page instead of something larger and more melodramatic. Though, for some reason, I'm still baffled why they gave him an umbrella gun, a trademark of the Penguin instead of, a cane or walking stick, which Joker's used from time to time. Though if they had fused Luthor with Cobblepot, I guess his endgame would have replaced the human mercenaries with rocket-equipped Arctic birds. They'd be too adorable to shoot! This heavier-set Luthor seems to stem from some renditions of the character from the early 80s, when he was meant to be a parody of a certain not-so-good-at businessman. But with the Joker's aesthetic traits attributed to the chemical burns and plastic surgery, not unlike the Tim Burton version. It's not bad, though that apparent superhuman strength and possibly enhanced speed never shows up after he kills those goons. Interesting idea, at least, to give Luthor's wealth and resources to someone that likes blowing things up for giggles. The Batsuit does deviate a bit, the belt a bit more angular, the bat emblem shaped more pentagonal, areas of the body that seem a different texture or material from the rest, like padding, as if he would need it? And most notably, a mask that covers his entire face, perhaps a sign that he's still hiding from the world. Now compare and contrast to the Superman suit, which, while still largely the classic design, ditches the outer trunks, which I say are better for color balance than a giant blue onesie, fight me, and has a color shift for the gloves, a darker portion running up the arms to surround the House of El Crest, as well as giving him a headpiece that clearly shows his face, as if he's embracing the world to some degree. Since Bruce Wayne didn't walk around in glasses, it makes me wonder if he's just abandoning the secret identity this time. Both designs work well for the story, built on familiar looks, but distinguishing it from what we've known. I think we could have seen more of some things, like Batman's crime fighting, Lois and Bruce's relationship, and what made him change his tactics, other than the love of the good woman. Though I've said before that Lois is a grounding force for Superman, so that is kind of consistent. We could have also used something that connected to what his dad tried teaching him about being better than those who resort to violence. The story that talked about finding better ways than the bullies, than using one's fists, that suggested compassion towards the mentally ill, ends before we see those kinder, gentler methods used by someone so powerful. But I suppose the point is that we, the reader, hope it works out for the best in this reality. Despite a few questions and nitpicks, it's still a good read, with classic art and some concepts to ponder, so I'd suggest checking it out. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.